Welcome to Understanding Islam, Series 3, Building a Just Society. This week we're going to look at just economics. The Qur'an says again and again, you are to establish the prayers and to pay the zakat. So what does it mean then to pay the zakat? Well, we can begin by saying that zakat is a purification of wealth. It is passing on a portion of your surplus wealth to those who are in need, so that the rest of your wealth is purified for you to use according to the guidance of God. Two central principles affect economics. The first is that human beings are called to be the khalifa of God, that is to be the steward of God. So those things that we think we own, we are in fact only the custodians. We are the custodians of the good things of God to be used according to divine guidance. Secondly, we are to be the abd of God, the loving servant of God. We are to obey God in all things. So to be the regent and to be the obedient servant of God means that Muslims are required to use the good things of the earth for the benefit of humanity according to the guidance of God. This is summed up in the principle sadaqa. Sadaqa is bearing the burdens of other human beings. It's not just about taking care of one's own family or of one's own community, but all humankind are part of the divine interest. God is interested in every human being. God sends the sun and the rain on every human being, and therefore the Muslim, as the agent, the regent of God, is required to have concern for every human being who lives upon the earth. The first economic principle to explore is the principle that if something is forbidden, that's haram. If something is forbidden for me to do, it is forbidden for me to profit from it. So we know, for example, that Muslims are forbidden to consume alcohol, and therefore it is forbidden for a Muslim to profit by trade in alcohol. This means no table license in the restaurant, no off license in the supermarket, and it means as well not investing one's pension funds in the distillery or in the brewery. Another important principle is that all economic activity must be guided by the principles of justice and of fairness. So the one who sells must sell things at a fair price. It is forbidden for someone to hoard goods, to create an artificial shortage so that the price goes up and then they can sell them on at a higher price. That is unjust. In the same way, it is forbidden for someone to wait until the goods are about to perish so that the seller has to sell them at a lower price, an unjust price. So the buyer must expect to pay a just price for the goods. The seller must charge a just price for the goods. So the principle of justice, of fairness and equity goes through the Islamic economic system. These same principles also apply when it comes to seeking a profession. What sort of job, what sort of business should a Muslim engage in? Well, it should be a business that promotes the well-being of human society and not something that exploits other human beings. In the same way, a profession that serves humanity, that builds up the human good of society, would be a good profession for a Muslim. Something again which debases human beings, which exploits them, would be an unacceptable profession for a Muslim to enter into. Now, it's bound to come about in the affairs of any human society that some people have more money and some people have less. Some people have more money than they need, and some people don't have enough money. And therefore sometimes there will be a need for some people to borrow from those who have more than enough. The principle here is a principle of bearing the burdens of your fellow human beings. If somebody is in need and somebody else has more money than they need at this particular time, then to lend money to that person in need is a good act. But not to make a profit out of their need. That would be to exploit them. So the interest-free loan is a central part of Islamic economics. This is a way of those who have more than they need to help those who need a loan without exploiting them. So the person must pay the loan back in full on the agreed date, but there should be no exploitation, no extra profit or benefit to the person who lent the money. Now you can see immediately that this is worked out on a basis that money is a stable, fixed commodity. It is built on a solid asset like the gold standard, so that money is always worth the same amount. It buys the same amount of goods. And therefore there's a discussion amongst the Muslim scholars that when you have a time of inflation, should the borrower pay back the exact numerical amount, or should that be increased in order to take account of the way that money has devalued during the intervening years, so that it should have the same buying power? And Muslim scholars will discuss this question. Another essential economic principle is that there can be no gain without risk. I cannot make money without exposing it to a proportionate amount of risk. So if I am to take an investment in a business, for example, I have to take an equity investment so that my investment is exposed to a certain proportion of risk. Now, this is different from taking a standard bank loan. So if I go along to a bank and ask for a bank loan, the bank manager will go through my books and check my business forecast, and then, okay, you can have your loan, but you understand we have to guarantee it against your assets. This means that if something goes wrong and you cannot repay that loan, we can seize your assets, and in this way the bank shouldn't lose. This will be an unacceptable business practice in Islamic economics, because you are privileging capital over against human endeavor. The human being is taking all the risk, the capital is being protected from any risk. If instead we are to go to an Islamic bank and ask for a loan against an Islamic system, then the bank manager will again go through my books very carefully. She will examine my business forecast, and then she will say to me, now you understand the only way that we can give you this money is by taking an equity share in your business. We will become partners, shareholders. This means that if the business does well and prospers, the bank gets its money back, and also it gets an increase on its shares. If, however, things go badly, then the bank must take a proportional loss. Now, this makes for a much more responsible borrowing market because nobody wants to lose money. No bank wants to invest in a bad business because their money will be at risk. In the same way, money is not a commodity, so money cannot be bought and sold. So it is forbidden, for example, for me to take £1 million sterling and buy £1 million worth of US dollars in the hope that by the end of the day or tomorrow, the dollar will rise against the pound and I will be able to sell my dollars for more than £1 million sterling and I will have made money. This is forbidden because it's trading in something that is not a commodity. Money must be backed by assets. It must be backed by goods. We can see that the same sort of reasoning applies in borrowing money to buy a house. Now, if I take a mortgage on a guaranteed asset-based system, then the bank or building society will take a legal charge over my house, which means that if I cannot repay, they will claim my property. But it also means that I take a loan on a house. If the house goes down in value, I still owe the same amount of money to the bank. Let me give you an example. Let us say that I take a mortgage for $220,000 to buy a house that is worth $250,000. Now, if the property drops in value to $200,000, I still owe the bank $220,000. The bank has not lost. It has guaranteed its investment in my house against the assets of the house. I have taken all the risks. If you compare that with an Islamic system in which the bank and I would buy the house together in a shared equity or a joint partnership system. Now in our example, the house costs $250,000. The bank takes a £220,000 share, which means it owns 88% of the house and I own the remainder. I then pay a rent for the use of their share of the house, and I save up money to buy another few percentage of the house every year, so that gradually I become the owner, the bank share decreases, and the rent decreases. Now, in this system, if the bank began with 88% of a £250,000 house, which is worth $220,000, if the value of the property drops to $200,000, then the bank still owns an 88% share. In other words, the bank has taken a loss because its 88% share of the house is now only worth $176,000. So the bank has taken a proportion of the loss, I have taken a proportion of the loss. You can see that this will make for banks and building societies to be much more responsible in lending money. It's in nobody's interest to see rapid inflation or decrease in the cost of housing, because then their money will be at risk, the same as the house buyers. Now, the reality is that you need a great deal of capital to be involved in lending money to buy houses, because the repayment term is so long that you need a huge capital to begin with. So there isn't enough money available in the market for all the Muslims who would want to take an Islamic mortgage. Therefore, the question comes, is it permissible to take an ordinary repayment mortgage to buy a house in a country like Britain, in which everybody owns houses? Or must a Muslim carry on renting because taking such a mortgage is forbidden? Well, some Muslim scholars in Britain have given the guidance that in order to house your family, it is permissible to take a repayment mortgage because you've no other real choice about housing your family adequately and with respect. But they then give 5 principles, 5 things that you should consider. First of all, you can only do this for your principal residence. You can't do it to buy a second home, because only the higher ethical demand of housing your family makes it an acceptable practice. Secondly, the house that you buy should be adequate for your family, but it doesn't need to be luxurious. Thirdly, you should take the loan for the shortest possible number of years that you can manage, so that you don't get into the debt culture of constantly living in debt, constantly looking for credit. Fourthly, you should seek to borrow the smallest possible amount. In other words, you should go around amongst family and friends and try to amass a deposit through interest-free loans that reduces the amount that you need to borrow from an interest-based mortgage system. And finally, it can only be a simple repayment mortgage. You shouldn't be seeking to profit out of it, for example, with an endowment mortgage. Now, some Muslims living in a country like Britain will take that guidance and say, yes, that seems right to me before God, and I will do that. Other people will say, no, I'm sorry, that still doesn't seem right. I won't follow that guidance. I don't believe that that's the right way to go according to the guidance of God. So at the end of the day, the decision always remains with the individual, because it is the individual who is answerable to God on the Day of Judgment. The Qur'an uses the Arabic term riba. Now, riba means literally doubling and redoubling. And it seems that in early Arab society, before the coming of Islam, the practice was that if you took a loan from somebody, you agreed to pay it back at the end of 1 year. If you couldn't pay it on the appropriate date, then you negotiated a further year and you would repay it back after 2 years, but now the amount was doubled. If at the end of 2 years you couldn't pay it back, you negotiated a 3rd year, but the amount was doubled again. So you get doubling and redoubling. This is forbidden in Islamic practice, because this turns human beings into slaves. You can easily see that a human being could go so deeply into debt that one generation actually inherits the debts of an earlier generation. We find people in some societies in the world today who are actually born into debt slavery, and from their childhood onwards they are working to pay off the debts of their parents or even of their grandparents. That is economic exploitation, and that is forbidden. But riba also has deeper meanings than that. It can sometimes be translated by the scholars as usury, that is, lending money at exorbitant interest. Some scholars will interpret it to mean interest of all sorts, and therefore all forms of interest are forbidden. This has an impact not only in one's personal life, I cannot borrow money at interest, but also in international and national affairs. If you think about many poor developing countries around the world, they need massive loans in order to be able to expand their countries, to develop an infrastructure, a health system, an education system, to industrialize and so on, in order that their people may have a better standard of living. Where are they to get those huge loans that they need? Well, they can only get them from interest-bearing financial institutions. Are they acceptable? And the scholars will debate this point. And again, we know that around the world today, there are lots of poor developing countries. A huge amount of their annual product goes into paying off the loans that they have taken from the rich institutions, from rich countries. And so poor people in poor countries are working hard in order to pay money to make rich people in rich countries even richer. This is where Islamic economics would put a challenge. The same kind of problems can be seen when we're thinking about personal debt, about dealing with banks. Is it permissible to have a bank account? With credit cards, with plastic cards in general, is it possible to live in British society without a plastic payment card? And then we think of people who go to such organizations as payday loan lenders, people who are actually charging quite exorbitant rates of interest. And again, we see that poor people are paying money that they can't afford, which makes rich institutions owned by rich shareholders even richer. And again, we see the Islamic economic model here holding up a spotlight, a mirror to this sort of practice, and saying, is this a just and equitable way for human beings to live and organize their economic life? The reality is that Muslims living in Western countries are necessarily caught up in an interest-bearing banking system. Can one exist without a bank account? Salaries are paid directly into the bank. Can one exist without a plastic payment card? So many things need to be ordered online or to be paid for with a payment card of some sort. Just having that payment card means that one is involved in that interest-based banking system. Now, this requires a degree of compromise. But again, we see that the Muslims struggling to work out how can I live with the greatest degree of economic integrity according to the guidance of God. This is promoting a sense of taqwa. It is promoting a sense of God consciousness. In all my dealings, in my economic life as well, I am accountable to God, and I must seek to live according to God's guidance. Savings are also part of human life. We need to save for the education of children. We need to save for retirement, to save to buy a car or to repair the house or whatever it may be. How is a Muslim in an interest-based system to save money? Well, the answer that has been devised is through investment, because one can only invest in those things that are ethically acceptable, and therefore one sees ethically screened investments like unit trusts and bonds. And in this way, the Muslim can invest money, can see it grow and return with exposure to a proportional degree of risk, but in a way which is invested in businesses that are acceptable and permitted according to Islam, that do not debase human life and society. Now, we need to be honest here, and we need to say that if all the wealthy Muslims in the world were investing their money according to Islamic ethical principles, the world will be a rather different place to the way it looks today. They are accountable for the way in which they live their economic life, and ultimately they're accountable to God. We need to understand the ethical principles of Islam as they apply to economics. Now we can turn to zakat itself. And here Sunni Muslims will calculate every year their surplus wealth. That is, the money that they have left over after they have met the basic needs of their family. Once they have calculated it, 1/40th part, 2.5%, no longer belongs to them. It must now be passed on to those who are in need within society, and 8 categories are stipulated here. These 8 categories, the recipients of zakat, are the poor, the needy, those who are in hopeless debt who need to be helped out of it, travelers who are stranded, to free slaves, to assist those who want to convert to Islam but who would suffer financially because of such a conversion, for spreading the message of Islam, and also for those who administer the funds. Now, within the Shia system, the equivalent is khums. Khums literally means 1/5. And this is a 20% calculation based on the same kind of surplus income, the net profit on business, accumulated wealth, certain types of gift, and this will all be calculated, the surplus worked out, and then 20% of this will be given for the welfare of the community and will be placed into the hands of the Grand Ayatollahs and their agents to be used for the welfare of the whole of society. So we can see that both in zakat and khums, we have got a system of the circulation of wealth from those who have more to those who are in need. Both Sunni and Shia will also pay zakat on the produce of agriculture and on gold and silver, and in the Shia understanding, khums is limited to the spoils of war. When we're thinking about both zakat and khums, it's very important that we clarify our thoughts. We're not talking here about charity. Charity is a free will offering. That is also part of Islamic understanding. One can give in charity, but that isn't zakat and khums. Nor is this a payment to the poor. For example, a traveller who is stranded. They have been robbed in a strange country. They have no money to buy a ticket home. Therefore, they can apply for assistance to travel home. They may have money at home, but they don't have it here. Those who benefit from zakat and khums, these are not beggars. They are people who are exercising their right. So what we're talking about is a wealth redistribution system that money passes from the rich to the poor without demeaning the poor, without demeaning those who are in need, but in order that there should be circulation of wealth within society. In just the same way, if one has more money than one needs, one is not allowed to hoard it. It must be used for the benefit of humankind. It must circulate. So let's take the example then of a Muslim who has made provision for today and for their family's needs tomorrow, for a pension, for the new roof fund on the house, or whatever it might be, and still there is more money left over. Well, now that money should be made to work in society for the benefit of society. This is the principle of infaq, the circulation of wealth. So that money should wisely be given away to those who are in need of it in order for them to become economically active. They can then start to have the dignity of providing for their own families. They can offer a service that is needed within the community. They can in turn circulate some of their surplus wealth to those who are in need. Now, infaq is not an investment. There is no return to the giver. The giver does not have any control over that money. It is given on the basis that all good things come from God, and they are to be used according to the guidance of God for the benefit of humankind, and God will reward the giver in the way that God knows best. Please remember that if you've missed any of these episodes of Understanding Islam, you can download previous ones from the Ahlulbayt website on demand section. Also, there's an article to go with each episode available from my own website. Join me next week when we will be looking at Islamic principles of relieving the sufferings of others. I look forward to seeing you then.